I think we'll get started here now as people start to come in. Um, Thank you everybody for joining me. My name is Jean-Pierre Larac, and I am the co-vice president of professional development with alongside my colleague Mark Roberts for the IABC Colorado chapter. And today, um, we're welcoming you to this Lunch and Learn presenting on Zoom, Revitalize Your On-Screen Presence with speaker Dan Wilinsky. Uh, for those of you who are unfamiliar with our group, we are the Colorado chapter of the International Association of Business Communicators. We're the Rocky Mountain region's leading organization dedicated to helping advance the careers of communication professionals. You can learn more about us at iabc-colorado.com, and I will also drop that link into the chat here if you'd like to see more about what our group is doing. We also have with us today our chapter president, Deanna Geldings, and she's been sharing in the chat some of the information and events that are going on in the near future. So please check those out, and we hope to see you at future events too. Now back to this Lunch and Learn for today. We're joined by communications veteran Dan Wilinsky, who will share practical tips to make you so that you can make a memorable impact in your next virtual meeting, whether it's for a job interview or a pitch to potential clients. Dan is an award-winning Denver-based communications consultant and former reporter with decades of experience in building and executing integrated strategic public relations campaigns. He has worked with top brands such as AT&T, Hallmark Cards, H&R Block, and Johnson & Johnson. But before I hand this over to Dan, I'd like to turn over the microphone to my colleague, Mark, for some housekeeping announcements.
Great. Nice to meet you all. Welcome. And we hope you'll introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't already. But we want to just walk through a couple of quick notes. If you can, stay muted during the presentation. We're going to have two periods where we will have some Q&A kind of halfway through. We'll do a short Q&A session at the end. We'll do a longer one. And I'll be keeping track of that and try to facilitate your questions, whether I read them or we turn them over to you to discuss. And but we hope to have a good opportunity for you to ask questions and participate. And so again, if you can stay muted, but please engage with us in the chat and give your questions and comments. And we'd also like you to have you tell us where you're from when you go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. So we'll see you. We'll be again having a Q&A and about halfway through the presentation. But let me turn it over to JP and Dan, and it's up to Dan to start the ball rolling. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us.
Great. JP, Mark, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay to get started?
Absolutely.
Great. And everybody can see me and hear me okay, right? So I'd like to welcome everyone. It means a lot. I see some friends from a long time ago and also some current friends. But most of all, I wanted to thank Mark and JP for coordinating this talk. Did a lot of behind the scenes work to make me look good, and I appreciate that. So on with the show. This meeting is being recorded. Mark, can you repeat again? I think we're going to put this on YouTube, right?
I'll unmute. There we go. I think JP has that information. I think he should be the one to share it.
Yes, if you'd like to come back to this recording, we'll be sharing it through social media through the IABC Colorado accounts after we record.
Yeah. So please, you don't have to take copious notes, but this is about audience engagement. So having said that, we've started the chat going. And what I'd love to do is continue the chat, and I'll be talking about the power of chat and emojis in audience engagement in a few minutes. But I'd love to continue that conversation. Please, as was said, we're going to keep the questions to the end in a parking lot. But if you have some burning questions now or some pithy things to say, We're going to be monitoring the chat, and then we're going to raise your questions or comments in the middle of this chat. So just want to keep it rolling that way. So the reason I have this slide up, this is my opening, is that it occurred to me a few days ago as I was preparing this presentation, with apologies to Priya Shah, who's already heard this, but it occurred to me that I'm giving a presentation on Zoom about presenting on Zoom to a meeting full of professional communicators. So I guess there's no pressure whatsoever. But this reminds me of the comedians who attended the annual joke-telling dinner. It was Morty, the veteran joke teller, comedian, and also Bill, his sidekick, but Bill is a newbie. He's never been to this dinner before. So Bill and Morty sit down, and Bill realizes after a few minutes that comedians are standing up and they're just saying a number. They're shouting a number, 26. And there's uproarious laughter, 83. I mean, people are cracking up left and right. So he's bewildered, Bill is. And so he asks his friend Morty, what's going on here? They're just shouting out numbers. Why is everyone laughing? And Morty explains, he's an old timer. He explains that, you know, we've been coming to these annual joke telling dinners for so long that we just know the number and people know the joke by heart. So they're laughing. And Bill says, okay, I'm going to give it a try. So he stands up and he says, 16. There's silence. You could hear a pin drop in the room. 37. Nope, nothing. So Bill's very discouraged and he sits back down and he turns to Morty and he says, I don't understand. I'm yelling out numbers too. Nobody's laughing. Morty says, well, I guess not everyone knows how to tell a joke. So that's what it reminds me of, comedians at a comedy convention. Anyway, here's a little bit about me. I've spent half my career with agencies like Fleshman Hillard and half with companies. And right now I have a freelance communications company in Denver. I'm doing a lot of media training these days, customer stories, podcast producing and writing marketing for various clients, corporate clients, and also nonprofits. And I'm a former news reporter too. So let's get to the meat of the conversation, shall we? And again, please interrupt on the chat if you have some thoughts about what I'm saying, but everyone can relate to this. So it occurs to me in the context of this talk is that we've lived more than 4 years now in our little boxes on screen. And if I were to guess, I would say that the majority of the day for you, even if you're working in an office space, is you're on virtual chats and virtual meetings or presenting virtually. And so there was difficulty at first, right? Think back to before COVID and some of these sentiments here. But people are getting better at virtual meetings, and I knew that. But I did want to ask the question, and IABC reposted this in Colorado, thank you. But we put a poll together, and we put that out a few weeks ago. It lasted, the survey, about 2 weeks on LinkedIn, that time of that length of time. And here's what we found. And maybe this surprises you, maybe it doesn't. I'd love your comments in the chat. But what it found is that the major issue that people have, the question was, what is your biggest challenge when presenting on virtual calls these days, after all these years of COVID have gone by? And 28 respondents, and the vast majority said, keeping my audience engaged and interested, slide by slide, when I'm leading a presentation. Maybe that surprises you, maybe it doesn't, but guess what? I've honed my presentation looking at that response, and I'm going to focus on keeping the audience engaged. And it's going to start with a story about Bessie. And this is what you want to do at the start of a presentation. We're going to talk about your slides and so on, but you want to tell a story at the start. This is, frankly, thinking about you having the opportunity to tell a story. You have the time to do it. You're leading the show. You have some time. But what you want to do is make it personal. Bring it down to one individual. And what we're going to talk about is Bessie. And Bessie's right here. So you saw the slide I had before about with a number of cows. Well, this is one cow. And my talk happens to be, in this instance, about the release of methane into the environment. As you know, methane emissions are a significant contributor to climate change, but they also play a role in the carbon cycle, carbon emissions. So I could have started with the group slide of the cows, the one you just saw before, and talk about the trends. For instance, if the entire livestock industry were its own country, then it would be the world's third biggest greenhouse gas emitter, falling between the US and India. China is in the lead when it comes to total greenhouse gas emissions. So my talk is about greenhouse gas emissions, methane, and trends that way. But it's much more interesting, right? If I focus on Bessie, the one cow. You could think about people in your own story too, not cows that you know, but people you know, or the story you want to tell with passion. But did you know that Bessie, for instance, she can release around 250 to 500 liters of methane every day? And we all know how, what my kids call toots, but also burps. She can do that, and that she is a significant contributor to climate change. So the moral of the story is here. Try to lead with something interesting, and you'll notice this is a more compelling picture than before. If you can lead with visuals, even a video if you want, or tell a story that's personal to you, something you're passionate about that brings it back to an individual. And one more thing about that, as a former news reporter, I worked with what was called, I wrote the Wall Street Journal lead. And when you read the Wall Street Journal and other reputable media sources, you see that they don't just get into the trend when they write a story. They talk about one individual in one state, for instance. Maybe it's a political issue, and they hone in on that issue. And then in the third or fourth paragraph, they bring up the context. It's the same in presenting on Zoom or giving an in-person presentation. I found to be the most effective. We've seen this before. This works for virtual presentations like this one, also speeches. If you're in a group presentation, tell them what you're going to say it, and then tell them what you said as a wrap up. It's whether you have 5 minutes or 50 minutes. This presentation, by the way, is going to be about 20 minutes. We're going to go through some, as was said before, some tricks and techniques that I found to be effective, and my peers are weighing in to say, look, Dan, this is the most effective in leading a virtual presentation these days, what to work on, what to focus on. And I guess I'd say, besides telling a story, which I just said, you want to be confident, you want to smile, you want to practice and show that you're enjoying yourself and talking about this. I certainly am. I do a lot of media training and presentation training, and that show that you know your stuff, and also think that you've got this. You know why? Because you've practiced a little bit. What you don't want to do, and I'm going to be guilty of this a little bit, is read from your text or read from the slides. God forbid, you don't want to do that. It's very distracting. You're not going to have many words on the slide, because one of our rules in this presentation is you're going to see very few words on the slides. And that's really what we recommend with a virtual presentation, or frankly, with any presentation. You don't want to clutter it up. You don't want to distract people with a lot of words. Everybody can read the words, but if you've got, for instance, a report on your communications findings or performance for your client, don't drop them all in a PowerPoint. No one needs that, and no one likes that, and they'll tune out very quickly. What you could do is say, the report's coming, but here's some top line results, and then very, very few words. Better yet, if you can throw in visuals in each slide that represent the findings, much, much better in terms of keeping the audience. I asked my peers, in knowing that I was going to go into this presentation, what was like a number one distraction for them. And I'm looking at myself on the screen, for instance. And I was a little surprised, but this annoys people to no end. They find it distracting, men and women, anyone, and looking at themselves in the camera and like getting caught up in that, especially when being the only presenter. So the trick is there to build your confidence is practice, as I am now, looking in the camera. But when people are talking, you want to acknowledge them. Say you have a group talking in a presentation. They're on camera or off camera. You want to look their direction when they're on camera, and not shake back and forth, but just acknowledge their presence. But then try to keep your eyes on the camera. It makes makes people think that you're focused on them. So that's one rule. The other, and we've all seen this violated before, and I'm going to open this up for questions in a second, is what is the angle of your camera? Now, so I work from home. I'm in my home office right now. It's sort of interesting. I'm into vinyl albums, as you can see, and I've got interesting collections behind me and books. Libraries are great. But my point is that I work in many spots around my house, and I don't always have the camera angle right. You don't want it looking down on you. That looks like you're being intimidated or you're small, relatively small. Or you don't want to look up in the camera because, frankly, people are looking up at your nose, through your nose. It could be. So what I do is if I'm sitting, for instance, at my dining room table, or I'm sitting outside at a table, I like to use books, or I have a stand also where I can raise my laptop if I'm using that, and then get the angle right. And we'll talk about the lighting and everything else in a second. You want to avoid unflattering angles, though, that detract from your message. And how many calls have you been on? I guarantee you when the angle isn't right. There's a lot of things not right with the Zoom presentation, but it can be distracting, right? If the angle is wrong. So work on that and prepare that ahead of time. My bugaboo, and people don't agree with me necessarily, is a blurred background. I guess the general rule is you want to look professional and present your best self with your backdrop. I like my backdrop here. It stirs some conversation, but people I found can focus on me. But I don't know how many times you've seen your coworkers on a call and they don't mean to do it, but you see dirty laundry on the floor behind them. You see all kinds of stuff. Also, when they're in a fake background, like maybe they're on the beach in Hawaii, that doesn't help me out because I'm too distracted. I see them in the sand. I can't focus on that. Maybe that's just me. I'd love to know what others think. I don't even like blurred backgrounds. I'd like people, if they're working from home, to have a home setup, if you will. They know the lighting is right, the angle is right, that they're showing confidence, that they've given some thought to present their best selves, even from a home environment. So I'm going to stop presenting now, pause, and I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And in doing so, this is a technique that I've learned in engaging the audience. A couple tips before we get into maybe some questions or some points that have been made. I'd like to entertain those, Mark and JP, if you could call those out. But a lot of times in the middle of a presentation, to make sure your audience is with you, because I can't see what you're doing, how many people are reacting, what you're doing on camera or off camera. So it's a great practice sometimes to stop the presentation, to check in for understanding, and also maybe to field a few questions. But, and there's a big but here, what you don't want to do in doing so is to lose control. So I have control right now, I'm the presenter, but I'd like to entertain a few questions with the knowledge that we're going to take a whole lot of questions at the end of the presentation. So Mark, JP, what do you have?
All right. Well, first a comment, just somebody agreeing with you about virtual backgrounds, that they're distracting. First question is, do you have any tips for building confidence in addition to practice?
Great question. I'd love some tips in the chat as well. Here's my main pointer. I've practiced this presentation, but you know what I find the hardest part is? I did some very amateur acting on stage, and I got very nervous. I got jitters and stage fright. I did, especially as I was about to go out. So what I do is I think about my first lines, or in this case, my first slide, and what am I going to say at first, and practice that and get into it. Then it becomes more and more comfortable for your presentation. But think about the start of it. Think where you want to take people, and most important, what story you want to tell, and psych up the level of engagement and the level of confidence you want to have. If you imagine it and you start out with it, it's easy. The rest is easy. It's smooth sailing.
Okay, well, next question is, do you have any tips for outlining a presentation? By that, I mean, laying out an outline of how you're going to present your content.
Yeah, so I could have done that better. A lot of times with this presentation, for instance, I could have had an agenda slide. This is a little bit more freewheeling because I want some of these tips and tricks to surprise you. But I just do just that. It goes back to the slide, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So an agenda slide is nice, which gets to another topic, which is how many meetings do you attend? It's a little bit off the point, and Priya, you know about this, where there's no agenda and you don't even know what this person's talking about. They're leading a meeting. You know the general theme or topic, but there's no agenda. There are no next steps. You don't know how long the meeting's going to last. And you're thinking to yourself, why am I even in this meeting? In my Sprint days, as some people will remember, Sprint is no longer, it's T-Mobile now. We did not have to attend a virtual meeting, or in that case, an in-person meeting, unless there was a PAL, meaning that outlined in the invite was a purpose of the meeting, just very quickly stated, an agenda, very quick, just a couple bullets, and then a limit, that's your PAL, that how long the meeting is supposed to last. And then what's so beautiful in this age of artificial intelligence, and this is a question I'd like to ask the group, and again, I don't want to go back and forth on this and get off track, but I think this is very important. Now meetings are recorded like this one, and you can get a transcript, as will be available for folks on this call to access later. But also with AI tools, and I'd be curious how many are using these, you can actually use AI tools, like I know Zoom has one if you're a Zoom subscriber, where you can ask AI, in this case Zoom, to lay out the action items and the roles and responsibilities and the due dates for various various action items during the meeting. Very beneficial for me. And I am not saying that AI is writing those action items and publishing those to the group that attended, but they're very helpful as a starting point, because I can't remember, for instance, what Beth was supposed to do or what I was supposed to do and when. So it's a great tool right now. So AI is your friend in meetings like this.
Okay, next question. Do you have a time frame of minutes you like to stay on for your story at the beginning of the presentation?
Keep it brief. I went probably too long. Keep it as brief as possible. It's dangerous to tell a joke. Maybe some of you didn't think that was funny, but it helps me ease into a presentation, and I try to make it relevant. So not always wise to tell a joke, but in this case, keep it as brief as you can. But again, show your passion and try to hook people, engage them right off the bat.
Lynn, if you want to unmute, you have a comment about using otter.ai. You
Hi,
want
Lynn.
to discuss how you use that and its benefit to you? And
yeah, hi Dan. Yeah, I use Otter and I love it. It gives me a transcript with the recording of the meeting, and it gives me just an outline of what happened in the meeting, action items. And I can also go in and ask it other questions, and it will reformat the transcript. And it's been incredibly useful. And it's allowed me to be more present in meetings where I'm not frantically writing down notes. So it's been a game changer for how I do my work.
great. We've got one more comment here.
Great.
I don't know if you want to address that, Dan, or
Please do. Go for it, and then we'll go back.
Okay, well, just a comment about the style rather than the substance of how we look, but creating depth perception in our camera angles, and you know, a flat background kind of is flat, but sometimes if we have stuff behind us, there is depth perception, and it gives some perspective to the shot that we're looking at of the presenter. Sometimes that is beneficial and something to consider.
You bet. And Mark, our next slide is about tech setup. And while we have you, and not to put you on the spot, but I am, you were in television. So what are some great tips on lighting? As a matter of fact, I joined this call to practice with Mark earlier, and my lighting was off, and it might still look like I'm illuminated a little bit. Lighting is very, very important. You hop on calls and people, you can't even see the person. There's light coming behind them, ambient light, and it's very distracting. So what are your tips, Mark?
Well, if you can use natural lighting, an open window, not directly on you, but giving you that natural light. I have actually two windows with curtains wide open, shining natural light into the room. And that tends to be a less harsh way of lighting yourself than actually having a light on you. And if you have a light up high, even a ceiling light or something like that, that isn't too bright, that isn't directly shining on you, that gives you some overhead perspective that can kind of balance things out. So I'm not a lighting expert. I'm not going to proclaim that my room is incredibly well lit, but you may see kind of an even lighting with the way that I've done this, and I think can be beneficial. So you take advantage of natural light anytime you have the opportunity to do so.
Thanks, Mark. And you are an expert because you didn't control the lights necessarily, but you were shown on the lights, in the lights. So appreciate your perspective. That's really helpful. And that goes for just a pre-check, a test of your own technology before you call, before your presentation. How many of you have had internet glitches, Wi-Fi glitches, connectivity? Your microphone isn't working, you're on mute, your cell phone is ringing, you haven't muted your cell phone. So do yourself a favor, do a pre-check meeting. It can be very embarrassing, but it also reflects badly on you. Imagine you're in a job interview, for instance, and your tech fails. That's just, doesn't help you very much. So love some comments on that too. Now think back to the LinkedIn poll. Most people, I think, have their technology down these days, right? And if they have an important presentation, they're confident that there won't be an epic fail, but it still goes wrong. Okay, so this is the meat of what I'd like to tell you. There are only a few more slides, and then I'd really like to open it up for questions and some comments. Everyone has their perspective on this topic. How to keep your audience focused? Well, one way is a strong opening. The second way is encourage chat, which I did here. Also emojis, keep the emojis going. If you like emojis, if you're working with your own team, keep that going. You can tell that they're engaged. Stop your presentation, as I did a little while ago, so that we can regroup, check for understanding. Let's see, what else? Yeah, slide off the screen. Do a live poll. We haven't talked about that, but do a live poll. And Christina has raised her hand. So Christina, what did you think? Did you have a comment?
Sorry, no comment. I was just playing with the emoticons.
Okay. But at least you're engaged. So appreciate that. So the other thing is you want to stay in control. So while I say there's chats, there's live polls, there's time for questions, maybe to pause for questions if you have time, like during your presentation. As I said before, what you don't want to do, hopefully, is relinquish control and lose your own way as the presenter, or just get a little confused about where we are in the presentation. So try not to do that. Looking at the camera versus looking at participants, this goes back to an earlier point. This comes with practice too, is try to look, especially where you have your laptop set up, look in the camera. It's a little bit awkward, but also when people are joining the call or talking, try to look away and give them some attention too. Look at the participants. And then less is more. So you notice these slides. I frankly, just an admission to you, some of the stock photography doesn't work for me, even in this presentation. It's okay. I like the cow pictures, but try to use creative, effective visuals. You don't have to create them yourself, and stock isn't always bad. But the point is that less words are more, right? So put your note. What I did in this presentation is I put some key points in the notes pages of my PowerPoint. Then I printed them out, or I stuck them on my wall to remember what to say for each slide. And that's been very effective for me. And then also practice. But you don't need a lot of words on a slide. And if you have a report, like I said, or something very complicated, say it's results of something, refer to a report, or maybe it's an ancillary presentation that you might bop to show a trend or presentation. This is what you want to do. You want to speak to your facts. And then control your environment. How many times, and I think you have to inject humor here sometimes. How many times in the last 4 years have you seen a cat jump on someone's lap in a key part of the presentation, or there's some noise behind them, or there's delivery at the door during a major presentation? That happens to me all the time. Amazon comes at the wrong time. But as best you can, control your environment and keep your focus on your presentation, the message you're trying to deliver, and keep rolling. And then if it's just terrible and you have to leave, make light of it if it's appropriate, if it's tasteful to do. I've done that a lot. And then we talked a little bit about recordings. Again, thanks for the point, those of you, about leveraging AI. Ensure that those who could not attend, and there were many people today who could not attend, but I encourage them to check out the recording and the transcript. And then I can use that, say if I'm in a work meeting, I can use that, those notes for follow-up items. And what you can do nowadays with these tools, as Lynn was saying, is these are very quick. So I can have follow-up notes ready, within the half hour of this presentation, for instance, about roles, responsibilities, timing, et cetera, to remind participants. What a powerful tool. It's amazing what day and age we're living in. Wish we had that 20, 25 years ago. So let me give you some summary, okay? So make it personal at the start. This is the end of my formal presentation, but yeah, try to tell a story. Try to hook your viewers right away, like Bessie, but not necessarily with a cow. But remember the Wall Street Journal lead. Project yourself in terms of smile, be confident, know your stuff, practice, 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 and follow up. Follow up on your presentation, especially for people who couldn't make it, with action items. So that's pretty much what I have, as well as the tricks and tips that you probably knew most of these, but maybe it affirmed what you were thinking all along when you have to lead a presentation. Hope that was helpful, but what I'm most interested in is comments, questions, etc.
So Bill, I'm going to see if Lynn wants to jump back in. She referenced the PAL format. Can you talk about what the PAL format is, Lynn?
Well, that was what Dan was talking about from Sprint. It's that purpose, agenda, and limits format. And it was amazing at Sprint. People would show up for meetings on time. And when the PAL said it was going to be, the meeting was over, people would stand up and walk out of the room. It kept meetings on time. It kept them organized, and everybody knew what was happening. It was a great tool. And I'm surprised more companies don't use something like that.
I actually tried to look it up. It gave me a reference to a video. I did a little internet search, but is there an internet overview that we can reference or something like that?
I have my Sprint employee handbook somewhere in here, and
No way, Lynn. After how many years?
A lot of
Antique.
years. I left Sprint in 2005, and it's somewhere in my house. If I find it, I will share it because it has the PAL outline. But it's very basic. You just have a Word document that you have your purpose, and it's a 1 or 2 sentences of what the purpose of the meeting is, and then you list your agenda, and then you have the limits, and that's just the time. It's very simple, but a really powerful tool.
I agree.
Very good. Well, a comment about stock photography. If you're from Deanna, if you're recording and putting your presentation online, be cautious about stock photography.
That's right.
Bots are getting really good about finding copyrighted photos and music, etc. So want to be aware of that. Don't want anybody sued. But good comment there. A question about what is your opinion about using multiple monitors? Are they helpful, or do they hinder by diverting your eye contact with your audience?
Some folks may have a different opinion. If I'm presenting, I want one monitor. Multiple monitors for work are great, but I have to look in the camera, and I want to know if I'm looking in the right screen and the right camera, et cetera. So I got to be singularly focused with one screen during presentations, but people may differ on that. Maybe you're using the other monitor for your notes or to as prompts for you, but no, one monitor for me. And then I'd like to speak to this other comment. I can read this, Mark, about giving team members some tips on how to best present themselves when they're not the main speaker. And what ticks me off, and maybe it's my age, is that people are expected to be on camera, but they're not on camera, especially when they're speaking. And they haven't been on camera all along, and I don't know what the rules are. Maybe it varies among companies and organizations that I've worked with, but be on camera if you're supposed to be on camera, first of all. And that's the main thing about presenting yourself. Also, don't interrupt, don't mansplain, don't speak too much, don't take over a meeting if you're not the presenter. I've had to work on myself, frankly, over my career for all of that, is you don't want to dominate with questions or conversation when you're not leading the meeting. It can be rude.
Okay, well, very good. Well, we have some time. If anybody wants to jump in or add any other questions, we want to make sure that we're able to have a good, healthy discussion about these issues, about how you present yourself, about how you present your content. There's elements of style and substance here, so we want to address both. And so if you want to know how you look, if you want to, we even would probably give you a quick critique of your screen behind you, your wall behind you, or your presentation, if you wanted to do that within reason. But any questions, now would be the good time to do it. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to turn it over to JP, who may turn it over. Oh, we got one. Do you create your presentation differently for a Zoom meeting than you would for a presentation you're giving in person?
I'd like other thoughts. Thanks for the question, Lynn. I lean in more so to have less words on the page, less text if I'm doing a Zoom presentation than, for instance, an in-person presentation. Because with an in-person presentation, I can do a PowerPoint. I'm there. I can lead a PowerPoint with pretty visuals and all that, but they may have some written materials that are associated with them. So, but what I try to do is make those materials light so they're not distracted from my visuals and presentation on the screen with few words. And so they're not burying themselves in the text, and they're compelled to look up with my engaging story and my personality that shines.
Comment from Jen that we made her realize that she should ask her team how she comes across in client presentations so they can coach me to make future presentations better. I think that's a great comment and something we should all do.
Ring lights has been brought up. Thank you, Deanna. I have a ring light right now. It's not working real well. Mark, I'd like your comment on that too. For 20 bucks, I've got a ring light that it literally is attached to my monitor in my home office. And I use it when my lighting doesn't seem right, or when the ambient lighting is shining one direction and I want to put it on my face. And it softens the lighting too with just an easy fix. So Mark, what's your opinion on those rings, the light rings?
I think if you're in a situation where you have no lighting, that is your only option. But if you can, again, flood your room with natural lighting, if you can open all the windows and you've got a lot of light in your room, the cameras are good enough today that they're going to treat you right. And it's much more natural. Any kind of forced lighting that is from a light or something like that, it has the potential to be a little more harsh or to create little glowing elements that sometimes are not flattering. And lighting is a very, when you're talking about television, it's a complicated endeavor that takes a lot of effort to get it right. And so you shouldn't expect that if you're going to go to Target and buy a ring light that you're going to have outstanding lighting. The better situation is to flood your room with natural light if you can, and maybe fill in some of the gaps. You'll be able to look at yourself, take a picture, and see any shadows, see shadows behind you, looking at your entire presentation. But you're almost better off using natural lighting. And not that I'm a lighting expert, but I think you can see that I've done just that, flooded my room with natural light, and you can see that it's even in many respects. there aren't shadows, and this is all natural. So I encourage that, and that is something that I always took note of when doing television. And you know, as I've said, the best time to take a picture of yourself is kind of dusk when the sun has gone down and you're just getting that natural light. The worst time is like 2 p.m. when the sun is shining bright down upon you. You look terrible. And so shoot for natural light where you can. And one thing we talked about in preparing for this that I'll chime in with is just getting in touch with being your authentic self. If you try to act, if you try to you know, put on airs or be something you're not in making your presentation, it's very common. That's what many of us do. It's kind of what you do when you first do this. But as you get to a point where you're comfortable, you're going to realize that what you are being is your authentic self. And that's what you need to strive for. That's the best. That's the thing that resonates the most when you are on camera. So, Dan, I didn't mean to steal your thunder,
No,
but
that's great. And last thing is, Dan was asking about green screens, and you know, it really depends on the context. What I think is meant is artificial backgrounds, maybe generated by my company with my company logo. If I'm presenting to a client, for instance, and that is par for the course, that's great. But if I'm presenting like this, and I'm talking about the importance of backgrounds themselves, I wanted to show my home office in that sense. So green screens may not be bad. It just depends on the audience.
if there aren't any other questions, we'll give it 30 more seconds to drop something in chat. But so I'm going to tap dance here for a few seconds.
Mark, actually, Deanna had another interesting thought there. Maybe this is a type of question, but what about glasses? She's saying that it's very distracting. I agree. Dan, can you share any tips there?
Yeah, I was going to mention, and as you were talking to Mark, and we can all relate to this, honesty is great with this. In other words, practice, have your glasses on, see if you can get the lighting right and it's not distracting. And if it is distracting, do something else. But ask friends, ask family, or just look at yourself and see what the best lighting would be. But I agree, I've seen it's just distracting people's glasses. The main point of this presentation really is presenting your best self, and that means preparing. And part of preparing is making sure your lighting is right on your glasses and everything else. So you want to present your best professional self, especially if it's a high stakes meeting like a job interview, for instance, or a big company presentation. I hope that helps.
And I want to add on to that too. Excuse me, I actually take a lot of photographs in my role. So when we're doing headshots, I'll try to see if I've got some glasses here. So, you know, you can see there's a glare in my lights there. What I coach the subjects to do is tilt them down just a little bit. You don't want to go too far down because that looks like your grandparent or something, but just a little bit down, and just changing that angle will reduce some of that glare. It's not perfect, but that helps in that situation. And since I'm back here in the spotlight, I actually had a question, maybe a final question for you, Dan. What do you prefer? Do you like Zoom meetings or do you like in-person meetings? I mean, obviously we were able to bring people all over the country together today in the middle of the day. So there's that, but there's pros and cons to each. And just wondering, you know, if you had the choice, would you meet in person or over Zoom?
This is so easy. In person, especially if it's a client or, you know, a teammate. In person, there's so much we lose in this age of virtual meetings. There's so much we lose. The benefit is, when I've worked at companies, and some of you are with companies with people in faraway countries, it could never happen like this. But if we're all local, let's get together, even over coffee or whatever. It's just so much more effective. And then you can get to know people. It's very difficult after COVID, I think. And sometimes it doesn't make sense, really. Why are we meeting virtually when we could just be getting together at 2 o'clock and toss this around, throw it out there? And the meetings to me are much more effective in person. That's my vote. And I'm a very social person, as you can tell, so that helps too.
Great.
Take a cheers to wrap up.
Yeah. Any other final thoughts, Dan? Good. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. It was a fantastic presentation. I hope everybody learned a lot. I sure did. And for everybody on the call, again, check out iabc-colorado.com. We've very active chapter, lots going on, great people to communicate with. And we'll, as I've said earlier, we'll share this recording over social media for those who want to go back to it, or if you know somebody who wanted to watch it but missed it. Well, with that, I will wrap it up. And thanks again to everybody who attended, and of course to you, Dan and Mark, for everything that we did to put this together. All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.